Some nights the world gets quiet in a way that feels almost deliberate. The light outside fades slowly, the sounds of the day thin out one by one, and somewhere in that hush you notice something gentle settling into your chest, a kind of stillness that asks for nothing. If this feels like a good place to rest tonight, you're welcome to stay. Now let's drift. There is a particular feeling many of us know, though we rarely speak of it. It is the feeling of looking back at an evening and realizing that an hour has simply gone. Not lost exactly, more like folded away somewhere we cannot quite see. You felt present. And yet if someone asked you to account for every minute, you would find that most of it had quietly slipped from your grasp. It seems that this happens to almost everyone in one form or another. A long drive home where the middle part disappears. A conversation that felt like minutes but turned out to be most of an evening. A quiet hour reading or simply sitting that vanished without leaving much behind. We tend to assume that time moves the same way for everyone at the same pace, like a steady current. We are all floating along together. But the truth gently is a little stranger than that. Researchers have found that the way we experience time has very little to do with the clock on the wall. It has much more to do with what is happening inside the mind while the clock keeps ticking. Two people can sit in the very same room for the very same hour and walk away with two entirely different senses of how long that hour actually was. One of them might feel that the time stretched on full and slow, the other might feel it passed in a breath. Same room, same clock, different time somehow lived twice. This is not a flaw in how we perceive things. It may be that it's simply how perception was built to work. The mind was never really designed to measure time the way a stopwatch does. It was designed to notice change, to notice what is new, what is different, what stands out from everything around it. And so without meaning to, your mind has been quietly editing your sense of time your entire life, shaping it not from seconds but from attention. Think of an evening where nothing much happened. The same chair, the same window, the same low hum of a television somewhere in the background. There is comfort in that kind of evening, but there is also a strange flatness to it afterward when you try to recall it. It blurs, it compresses. An hour like that can feel in memory like only a few minutes. And then think of an evening that held something different. A new place, an unfamiliar street, a conversation that surprised you. Even if it lasted the very same 60 minutes, it tends to feel larger once it is over. Fuller. As if more of it actually happened even though the clock insists otherwise. Some scientists believe this comes down to how busy the brain is moment to moment taking things in. When there is little new to notice, the mind moves quickly past the moment, almost skimming over it, and very little gets tucked away to remember later. When there is more to take in, more detail, more unfamiliar shape to the world around you, the mind slows down just slightly to register it. And what gets registered more carefully tends to feel afterward like it took up more space in time. It is a soft kind of paradox. The very same hour can feel both short while it is happening and surprisingly long once you look back on it. Or the opposite. An hour that drags painfully in the moment, like waiting somewhere with nothing to do, can shrink down to almost nothing in memory, because there was so little for the mind to hold on to. Psychologists often note that this is one of the quiet reasons why an unfamiliar trip can feel like it lasted far longer than the week it actually took. Every street was new, every meal, every face, every turn in the road asked your attention to notice something it had not noticed before. And so the mind, almost without trying, stretched the experience wide. Meanwhile, an ordinary week at home filled with routine can pass by almost unnoticed, even though it contained exactly the same number of hours. There is something gentle in this thought if you let it settle. It suggests that time is not simply something that happens to us. It is something the mind quietly shapes moment by moment based on what it chooses to notice and what it lets pass by unmarked. The brain tends to interpret a full busy stretch of attention as a long stretch of time and a quiet repetitive one as a short stretch of time, almost as if it were measuring not minutes but moments worth keeping, like a photograph album that only fills up on the days something seemed worth photographing. The other days remain pages mostly blank, even though they were lived just the same. It seems we carry inside us two very different clocks. One ticks forward steadily second by second, indifferent to what is happening. The other moves only when something catches its attention, expanding and shrinking depending on how full or how empty a moment feels. Most of the time we live by the second clock without ever realizing the first one was even there. Studies indicate that this is part of why the years can seem to move slower in childhood and quicker as life goes on. Every day was unfamiliar once. Every sound, every face, every small discovery asks something of your attention. And so each day held more weight, more length, simply because there was more for a young mind to notice. We will return to this gently later, because it carries its own kind of quiet wonder. For now, it may be enough to simply notice that the hour that disappeared earlier was never really lost. It was simply quiet, uneventful. The kind of hour the mind let pass without marking it down. And the hour that felt impossibly long, the one full of something new, was not actually longer at all. It only felt that way because more of it was kept. There is a soft comfort in that. It means the long days are not measured in hours at all, but in attention. In small moments noticed gently one after another. And somewhere underneath all of this, there is a quieter question still waiting. Not about hours or days or evenings that vanish, but about where exactly inside the body all of this time is actually being kept. There is no single place inside the brain where time is kept, no small chamber, no hidden clock ticking quietly behind the eyes. Researchers have found that the sense of time is something built from many parts of the brain working together, rather than something stored in one location the way a heartbeat is kept by the heart alone. It seems that several regions take part in this. A region near the front of the brain just behind the forehead seems to help judge how long something lasts. Deeper structures tucked closer to the center seem to help track rhythm and pacing. And a small structure near the base of the skull, usually associated with balance and movement, also appears to play a quiet role in timing, in ways scientists are still exploring. There is something almost comforting in that. Time, it turns out, is not kept in one careful little vault. It is woven instead across many different parts of you, each one contributing a small thread to a feeling that arrives in the end as simply, "This moment is happening now." Researchers have found that this shared effort might be part of why our sense of time can feel so unreliable. If only one part of the brain measured time, perhaps it would feel steady like a metronome. But because so many regions are involved, each shaped by mood, attention fatigue, and unfamiliarity, the sense of time becomes something soft, bendable, more like a tide than a ticking hand. Imagine for a moment not a clock with gears turning in perfect sequence, but something closer to a quiet choir. Many voices, each one slightly different, blending together to form a single impression. Most nights the choir sings in harmony, and the hours feel ordinary. But sometimes one voice rises a little, and the whole feeling of time shifts gently without any clear reason why. Psychologists often note that mood seems to be one of the strongest of these voices. When someone feels calm, time tends to feel like it is moving at an even familiar pace. When someone feels anxious or rushed, the same number of minutes can feel as though they are slipping away too quickly. And when someone feels deeply at ease, the way one might feel right now, lying still in the quiet dark time, can seem to soften and loosen, almost as if it was no longer in a hurry to go anywhere. Studies indicate that body temperature may also have a quiet influence on this. When the body is slightly warmer, some research has shown that internal timing can feel a little faster. When it is cooler, time can feel slower. It may be that the brain partly reads its sense of time from small physical signals like this, the same way it reads hunger or thirst or tiredness. Time, in other words, may not be only a mental experience. It may also be something felt quietly in the body itself. There is a certain tenderness in that idea, that the body you are resting in right now, the warmth gathering under a blanket, the slow easing of your breath, the gentle drop in your own temperature as you begin to settle towards sleep, might already be nudging your sense of time to slow down with you, as if the body were preparing the mind gently for rest by quietly turning down the pace of everything inside. Neuroscientists have observed that certain chemicals in the brain also seem tied to this sense of pacing. One in particular, often associated with motivation and reward, appears to play a role in how quickly or slowly time feels like it is passing. When levels of this chemical shift even slightly, the felt sense of time can shift along with it without a person ever noticing the cause. This may explain something many people have quietly wondered about. Why waiting for something exciting can feel unbearably slow, while losing yourself in something enjoyable can make hours disappear in what feels like minutes. The clock, of course, never changes its pace, but the chemistry behind your attention does, and so the feeling of time bends to match it. It seems that the brain is in many ways not measuring time at all. It is measuring experience and quietly translating that experience into something that feels like time. A kind of soft internal storytelling happening underneath conscious awareness, stitching together a sense of duration out of attention, mood, temperature, and chemistry. What we understand so far suggests that this is also why time can seem to behave so differently depending on what a person is doing. Watching something unfamiliar tends to stretch the feeling of time outward. Watching something deeply familiar tends to let it pass by almost unmarked. Even now, this very moment, your own sense of how long this has lasted is being shaped not by the actual minutes on a clock somewhere, but by how settled, how at ease you happen to feel. There is something quietly reassuring in realizing this. It means the sense that time is dragging or rushing or melting away gently like it might be tonight is not something wrong with you. It is simply your brain doing what it has always done, blending many small signals into a single soft impression of now. The body and mind working together this way were never really built to be exact instruments. They were built to be adaptable, forgiving, capable of expanding a single quiet evening into something that feels afterward like it held more than its share of minutes, or capable of letting an entire afternoon dissolve gently into almost nothing simply because nothing much asked to be noticed. And perhaps that adaptability is part of what allows a moment like this one late at night, lying still, the noise of the day already far behind, to feel like it is stretching outward slowly, gently, without any urgency at all. As though time itself were loosening its grip just slightly, the same way your shoulders might be loosening right now. The same way your breath might already be slowing without you trying to make it happen. There is still more to notice here quietly about why some moments seem to hold so much more weight than others, why a single second under the right conditions can feel like it stretches on far longer than a second should. That thread is still waiting gently just ahead. There is a particular kind of second that feels nothing like an ordinary one. The second just before a sudden stop. The second a glass slips from a hand before it ever reaches the floor. In moments like these, many people describe something strange happening to time itself. It seems to slow down, to stretch gently but unmistakably as though the world itself had taken in a slow breath. Researchers have found that this feeling is real in the sense that people genuinely experience it this way. But what is interesting is that the world outside does not actually slow down at all. The second is still exactly 1 second. What changes instead is something happening quietly inside the mind. Neuroscientists have observed that in moments of sudden alertness, the brain shifts into a different mode of attention. It becomes sharper, faster at noticing detail, more alert to small changes in sound, in movement, in the space around the body. And it is this heightened noticing, rather than any actual change in time, that seems to create the sensation of everything slowing down. Think of it like a camera that suddenly switches from capturing a few frames a second to capturing many more. The scene being filmed has not changed its pace at all, but because so many more frames are being taken, the resulting memory of it feels slower, fuller, almost stretched when played back later. The brain in moments of sudden alertness appears to do something very similar. It does not slow time, it simply gathers more of it. This may be one of the gentlest surprises hidden inside the experience of fear or shock or sudden surprise. It is not that the moment itself becomes longer, it is that the moment becomes more carefully recorded. And a more carefully recorded moment, once it becomes a memory, tends to feel as though it lasted longer than it did. Psychologists often note that this matters most in memory rather than in the instant itself. In the middle of a startling moment, most people do not consciously feel time slowing down while it happens. It is only afterward, looking back, replaying it, that the moment seems to have stretched. The richness of detail laid down in memory creates the impression in hindsight of something elongated. A few real seconds dressed up by memory into something that feels like much more. There is something almost tender in this idea if you sit with it gently. It suggests that the body in its most alert moments is not trying to slow the world down to give you more time to react exactly. It is trying to give you more understanding, more detail to work with. As if some quiet ancient part of the nervous system simply wanted you to notice as much as possible just in case any of it mattered. Studies indicate that this heightened state involves several systems acting together rather than one alone. Hormones associated with alertness rise, quickly sharpening focus. Areas of the brain associated with threat detection become more active, prioritizing certain sights and sounds over others. And areas associated with memory formation seem to work harder than usual, laying down a denser trail of detail than an ordinary moment ever would. It may be that this is also why people often remember small, oddly specific details from moments of sudden surprise. The colour of a passing car, a particular sound in the background, a stray thought that crossed the mind at exactly the wrong or right time. These details are not remembered because they mattered. They are remembered because the brain for a brief stretch was recording almost everything indiscriminately, the way a wide net catches far more than it was aiming for. What we understand so far suggests that this entire process likely developed as a kind of quiet protection, a nervous system that notices more during moments that might matter, gives a person a better chance of responding well. Across a great deal of time, bodies that paid closer attention during sudden moments may have simply fared a little better than those that did not. And so this heightened noticing, this gentle illusion of slowed time, may have settled into us generation after generation as something the body simply knows how to do without ever being taught. There is a soft kind of grace in that. The feeling that time stretched during a frightening or startling instant was never really about time bending to accommodate you. It was about attention sharpening quietly on your behalf, gathering as much of the moment as it could just in case you needed it. This same sharpening, interestingly, seems to fade as quickly as it arrives. Once the alertness passes, the dense, detailed noticing tapers off, and ordinary moments return to their usual lighter way of being remembered. The mind does not stay in that heightened state for long. It returns gently to its familiar rhythm, the same rhythm that lets evenings blur together and ordinary afternoons slip by almost unnoticed. It seems that the contrast between these two states, the dense, detailed noticing of a startling moment and the soft, blurred noticing of an ordinary one, is part of what makes our sense of time feel so uneven across a life. Some moments lasting only seconds end up taking up an outsized space in memory. Others lasting hours leave behind almost nothing to hold on to. and this brings something quiet and rather lovely into view. If a moment's length in memory depends so much on how closely it was noticed, then time itself may be less about the clock and more about attention, not measured in minutes, but in how much of a moment the mind decided to keep. There is a quieter layer to this one that most people never consider, because if attention shapes how long a moment feels once it has passed, then somewhere deep inside memory itself, time may not be stored the way we imagine at all. You said ban na chuyên gia, Viet kịch bản tiếng Anh, kể chuyện khoa học trước khi ngủ trên kênh YouTube. Bạn có màu sắc kể chuyện độc đáo hấp dẫn riêng biệt mang đậm đi. Memory does not store time the way a video camera stores footage frame after frame in perfect, unbroken order. It seems that the mind keeps something closer to fragments. Small pieces of a moment gathered loosely together, more like a handful of photographs than a continuous film. And it is from these scattered photographs, oddly enough, that our entire sense of how long something lasted is quietly built. Researchers have found that when people are asked to judge how long an experience felt, they are not really measuring the experience itself. They are measuring how much they remember of it. A walk through a quiet, familiar park might take exactly as long as a walk through an unfamiliar one. Yet the unfamiliar walk almost always feels longer, simply because more of it managed to leave a trace. The familiar one slips by with so little held onto that afterward it barely registers as having taken any time at all. There is something gently humbling in that. It suggests that an entire afternoon lived fully and attentively can outweigh an entire week lived on autopilot, at least in how it settles into memory. Not because the afternoon contained more hours, but because it contained more moments worth keeping. Neuroscientists have observed that this kind of memory, the type tied to personal experience, tends to form most strongly around new or unusual details. A different shaped doorway, an unfamiliar voice, the particular way light fell across a room you'd never been in before. None of these things would ever ask for our attention directly, and yet the mind seems to reach for them anyway, almost instinctively, tucking them away simply because they were different from what came before. It may be that this is one of the oldest habits the brain ever developed. Long before clocks or calendars or any formal way of measuring time, paying closer attention to what was new and letting the familiar fade quietly into the background may have simply been a useful way to move through the world. Familiar things rarely need close attention. New things sometimes do, and so memory shaped slowly across an enormous stretch of time may have learned to lean toward what stood out rather than toward time itself. This means that the years that feel richest in someone's life are rarely the years with the most events written down on a calendar. They are the years that ask the mind to notice something new again and again. A new place, new faces, new mornings that did not yet feel like all the other mornings before them. Each one leaves behind a small, quiet trace. And it is the accumulation of these traces, not the actual hours, that ends up deciding how long a stretch of life feels once it is looked back upon. Psychologists often note that this is part of why the early years of any new chapter in life tend to feel especially long in memory. A new job, a new home, the first months somewhere unfamiliar. Everything still asks to be noticed because almost nothing has settled into routine yet. Then slowly, as the unfamiliar becomes familiar, the noticing eases. The mind stops marking each detail so carefully. And the months that follow, even though they may be just as full of life, tend to blur together into something far shorter in memory. There is a soft, almost comforting symmetry in this. It means the feeling that life is moving faster as the years pass is not really about life speeding up at all. It is about familiarity quietly settling in, asking less and less of the mind's attention. The days are not shorter, they are simply less often new. Evidence suggests that this is closely tied to how the brain forms what scientists describe as autobiographical memory, the long, loosely threaded record of a person's own life. Unlike a list of facts, this kind of memory does not hold dates and durations directly. It holds impressions, feelings, fragments of sensation tied loosely to a sense of when rather than a precise count of hours. And it is from this looseness that our felt sense of a long life or a short one, a slow year or a quick one, actually comes. The mind quietly registers, it seems, in a kind of soft shorthand. Not this lasted 4 hours, but more like this mattered, and a little of this, and barely any of that. And later, when we try to recall how long something felt, we are really just counting how many of these soft, quiet markers were left behind. A handful of strong ones, and a stretch of time feels rich and long. Very few, and the very same stretch can collapse down to almost nothing. It is a little like trying to remember a song by the parts that stood out rather than by playing it back in full. A particular note, a pause that lingered, a shift in tone partway through. The whole song was there every second of it, but what remains afterward is only the handful of moments that ask to be remembered. Time, much like a song, seems to live on in the parts that stayed rather than in the parts that simply played and faded. There is a quiet kind of permission in this thought, especially at an hour like this one. It means that a single quiet evening, fully noticed, fully felt, however small it might seem, holds its own kind of weight. Not because it was eventful, but because it was in its own gentle way seen. And there is still more here just beneath the surface about how the mind decides what is worth keeping at all. Some moments slip away almost instantly. Others linger for years, returning quietly again and again long after the day that held them has gone. Some moments seem to choose on their own never to leave. A particular afternoon from many years ago. A certain smell that returns unannounced, carrying an entire day along with it. While so much else from that same period has quietly disappeared, it seems that memory is far less democratic than it appears. It does not keep things because they happened, it keeps things for reasons of its own. Researchers have found that emotion plays an unusually large role in deciding what memory chooses to hold on to. A moment touched by strong feeling, whether gentle or unsettling, tends to be remembered far more vividly than a moment that passed by emotionally flat. This is not because the emotional moment was more important in any objective sense. It is because the brain appears to tag certain experiences as worth returning to, almost like placing a small quiet marker beside them long before we consciously decide whether they matter. A structure deep within the brain closely tied to emotion seems to play a central part in this. When something stirs a feeling even faintly, this region appears to grow more active, working alongside the brain's memory centers to help certain details settle in more firmly than others. It is a little like a hand gently underlining a single line in a long, otherwise unremarkable page, so that it stands out clearly when the page is read again later. Studies indicate that this is part of why ordinary days so easily blur together, while certain single moments, sometimes lasting only seconds, remain remarkably clear for years afterward. The brain was never trying to remember everything equally. It was choosing quietly and continuously which experiences seemed worth the cost of holding on to and which ones could simply be allowed to fade. There is something tender in realizing this. It means the moments that have stayed with you, the ones that still return softly from time to time, were not chosen at random. Some part of you long ago decided they were worth keeping. Not because they were grand or important to anyone else, simply because in that instant something in you responded to them. The mind tends to favor in particular moments tied closely to the senses, a specific sound, a particular light, a texture remembered more through the body than through conscious thought. Psychologists often note that sensory detail more than any factual description is what gives certain memories their strange, lasting vividness. You may not remember the exact words spoken on an ordinary morning years ago, but you might still remember with surprising clarity the quality of the light coming through a window or the particular quiet of that room. It may be that this is also why scent of all the senses often carries memory so powerfully. The pathways connecting smell to the brain travel close to the regions responsible for emotion and memory more directly than pathways connected to sight or sound. A single unexpected scent can sometimes return an entire afternoon fully formed faster than any deliberate effort to recall it ever could, as though certain doors to memory were left slightly open, waiting only for the right small key to pass through. What we understand so far suggests that memories are not stored once, and then simply left untouched, waiting patiently like books on a shelf. Each time a memory is recalled, it appears to be assembled again, drawing on whatever is available at that moment, slightly reshaped by present mood, present surroundings, present familiar feeling. This means the memory of a single afternoon returned to many times across many years is never being replayed in exactly its original form. It is being gently rebuilt again and again, each time just slightly different from before. There is a quiet kind of grace in that as well. It suggests that memory is less like a fixed photograph and more like a story retold softly over time, shaped a little differently with each retelling, yet still recognizably itself. The afternoon you remember tonight is not quite identical to the one you would have remembered 5 years ago, and yet somehow it still feels like the same afternoon, carrying the same quiet weight it always has. Neuroscientists have observed that during sleep, particularly in its deeper stages, the brain appears to revisit certain memories from the day, strengthening some, letting others fade further into the background. This happens without any conscious involvement at all. While the body rests, something in the mind continues working quietly underneath, deciding in its own slow way what deserves to remain and what can simply be allowed to drift. It is a strange kind of comfort knowing that even now, as the body settles towards sleep, something inside is gently sorting through the day that has just passed, not erasing it, not filing it away coldly, simply deciding with quiet patience which small pieces of today are worth carrying forward into tomorrow's memory of who you are. And there is still something more here just beneath this about why certain memories seem to soften gently with age while others remain sharp for an entire lifetime, almost untouched by time at all. There is an old quiet observation almost everyone seems to share at some point in life. As children, a single summer could feel like it lasted forever. The school year felt endless while you were in it. And yet somewhere along the way, without anyone quite noticing it happen, the years began to move faster. Whole seasons start to pass like single afternoons once did. Scientists are still exploring exactly why this happens, but several gentle explanations have emerged, each one offering a small piece of the picture rather than the whole of it. One explanation involves something almost mathematical, though it does not feel that way when you live through it. For a child of 5, a single year makes up a full fifth of everything they have ever known. For someone reaching 50, that same year is only a tiny fraction of a much longer life already lived. Researchers have found that this changing proportion may shape how significant a year feels, even though the year itself in actual days never changes length at all. A year at 5 carries enormous relative weight. A year at 50, however full it might be, simply takes up a smaller slice of an ever-growing whole. There is something gently humbling in that thought. It suggests that time is not only felt but also quietly measured against everything that came before it. The longer a life grows, the smaller each new year appears beside it. The way a single candle added to a room already full of light changes far less than the very first candle ever did. It seems that there is also a second, quieter explanation closely tied to something already touched on: novelty. Childhood is by its very nature a season filled with first encounters, first days, first friendships, first independent steps into the world. Each one asks the mind to pay close, careful attention, and each one leaves behind a deeper trace in memory. Adulthood, by comparison, tends to settle into routine. Many days resemble the ones before them closely enough that the mind no longer feels the need to mark them so carefully. This means the slowing of time in adulthood may have little to do with time itself, and much more to do with how familiar life has become. The brain tends to compress what is familiar and stretch what feels new. And since childhood is so densely packed with newness, while adulthood often settles into comfortable repetition, the years naturally begin to feel thinner, lighter, easier to pass through unnoticed. Neuroscientists have observed something else as well, something a little more physical in nature. Certain studies suggest that the speed at which the nervous system processes incoming information may shift gradually with age. In early life, neural signals may travel and update with a particular speed and frequency, allowing the brain to take in a great deal within a short span. As the years pass, this internal processing pace may settle into a slightly steadier, less rapid rhythm. If each moment is processed with slightly less density than before, then more real time may be needed to create the same felt sense of a moment passing, which could help explain why hours start to feel like they slip by more easily than they once did. It may be that this is closely tied to something mentioned earlier as well, the chemical messenger involved in motivation and reward. Some research has suggested that levels of this messenger may shift gradually with age, and since this same chemical appears connected to how richly a moment is experienced, a gradual change here could quietly influence how fully each new day is felt and remembered later on. There is a soft kind of permission perhaps in setting these explanations side by side rather than insisting on only one. Time may not be slipping away because something is going wrong. It may simply be the natural result of a life that has grown fuller, a mind that has grown more familiar with the world, and a nervous system that processes experience just a little differently than it once did. What we understand so far suggests that none of this needs to feel like loss. If new experience is what stretches time, then time can still be gently lengthened, even now simply by noticing more. A new path walked instead of a familiar one. A small ordinary detail looked at as though seeing it for the very first time. The years do not have to feel thinner simply because they've grown more comfortable. Comfort and attention, it seems, can still exist together quietly side by side. There is a quieter layer to this one that most people never consider. Because the way time bends with age, with attention, with familiarity, may not be only a matter of the mind. It may also be something the body itself has been quietly keeping track of all along, in a rhythm far older and far steadier than thought could ever be. Long before there were clocks on walls or numbers to glance at before bed, the body already knew in its own quiet way when night was arriving. It seems that this knowledge never really left us. Somewhere beneath conscious thought, a kind of internal timekeeping has been running steadily since before any of us were born. Researchers have found that nearly every cell in the human body carries its own small built-in rhythm, rising and falling across roughly 24 hours. This rhythm influences far more than simply feeling sleepy or awake. It quietly shapes body temperature, the release of certain hormones, even how alert or how slow the mind feels at different points across a single day. At the center of this rhythm sits a small cluster of cells tucked deep within the brain, just above where the optic nerves cross. This tiny structure receives signals about light and darkness from the eyes and uses that information to set the pace for almost everything else in the body. It functions in a sense like a conductor standing quietly at the center of a very large orchestra, one that never stops playing even while you sleep. It may be that this is part of why darkness itself feels so naturally tied to rest. As light fades in the evening, this small internal conductor begins to slow certain processes and awaken others. A hormone associated with sleepiness begins to rise. Body temperature begins very gradually to drop. None of this requires any thought or effort. It happens quietly, almost like a tide drawing back from the shore without asking permission. Studies indicate that this rhythm evolved across an extraordinarily long stretch of time shaped by the simple repeating fact of a turning planet. Long before humans existed at all, life on Earth was already organising itself around light and dark, warmth and cool day and night. And so this rhythm is not something the body learned recently. It is something ancient carried forward quietly inside nearly every living thing, including us. There is something soothing in realizing this. The tiredness that begins to settle in during the evening is not simply the result of a long day. It is also the echo of something far older, a pattern shaped slowly across countless generations and still quietly guiding the body even now, in this very room. Psychologists often note that this circadian rhythm operates somewhat independently of the clock mind and memory discussed earlier. While memory shapes how long a day feels once it has passed, and attention shapes how a single moment feels while it is happening, the circadian rhythm works on a steadier, more physical timescale, one based on temperature, hormones and light rather than thought or emotion. It is in a way the body's own quiet sense of time running alongside the mind's far more flexible one. What we understand so far suggests that these two systems, the mind's soft bendable sense of time and the body's steadier internal clock, do not always move in perfect agreement. This may be part of why staying awake too long can begin to feel strange, almost dreamlike, as the body's rhythm pulls toward rest while the mind tries to remain alert. And it may also be why a quiet evening like this one, when both systems begin to slow together, can feel so naturally, gently restful. Neuroscientists have observed that this internal rhythm can shift slightly out of step with the outside world, particularly when light exposure changes suddenly, such as during long-distance travel across many time zones. The body's internal clock continues running at its own familiar pace for a while, even as daylight outside no longer matches it. This is often felt as a kind of quiet disorientation, the sense that morning does not quite feel like morning, or that evening has arrived too early or too late. It is in its own way a gentle reminder of just how deeply this rhythm shapes our sense of time, even when we're not consciously aware of it at all. It seems that artificial light, something so ordinary, now that it rarely receives a second thought, has also quietly changed our relationship with this ancient rhythm. Bright light in the evening, especially the kind emitted by screens, can delay the rise of that sleep-associated hormone, nudging the body's internal sense of evening a little later than it might naturally fall. Centuries ago, darkness itself was the signal for the body to begin winding down. Now that signal often arrives more quietly, more gradually, and sometimes much later than it once did. There is a small, gentle invitation hidden in this knowledge. As light continues to dim now in this room, the body's old rhythm is likely already responding quietly, lowering temperature, quietly easing tension, quietly preparing for rest in a way that asks nothing of conscious effort at all. You do not need to do anything to begin this process. In many ways, it may already be underway. This rhythm, ancient and steady as it is only one part of how the body experiences time. There is another state closer still, when the rhythm has nearly finished its work and the boundary between waking thought and something softer begins ever so quietly to blur. There is a particular state of mind that arrives sometimes without invitation. Not quite awake, not yet asleep. The thoughts begin to loosen. Attention drifts away from anything in particular, settling instead on nothing at all, or perhaps on everything very softly all at once. It seems that this state, often dismissed as simply distraction, is far more interesting than it first appears. Researchers have found that when the mind is allowed to wander like this without a task to focus on, a particular network of brain regions becomes more active. Scientists often refer to this as the default mode network, a quiet system that seems to switch on whenever the mind is not being asked to concentrate on something specific. It activates during daydreaming, during idle moments, and especially during the soft, unfocused minutes just before sleep arrives. It may be that this network plays an important role in how the mind processes the day that has just passed. While focused attention is busy taking in new information, this wandering, unfocused state appears to give the mind room to quietly sort through everything gathered earlier, weaving loose threads together without any particular urgency or direction. There is something gentle in imagining this. As the body settles further into stillness and thoughts begin to loosen their usual shape, the mind may not be falling idle at all. It may simply be shifting into a different kind of work, slower, quieter, less concerned with answers, and more inclined towards simply wandering through whatever drifts past. Neuroscientists have observed that during this drifting state, the sense of time often becomes notably less precise. Without a task to anchor attention, the mind loses much of its usual reference point for measuring how much time has passed. 10 minutes of quiet daydreaming can feel like only a moment, or occasionally a single quiet thought can stretch on gently far longer than expected. Time in this state becomes soft at the edges, difficult to hold on to in any exact way. This loosening of time seems closely tied to a quieter sense of self as well. Studies indicate that the same regions involved in mind wandering also play a role in self-reflection in the quiet internal voice that narrates a person's own experience throughout the day. As this state deepens, that narrating voice often grows softer, too, less insistent, less focused on naming or organizing what is happening. There is simply experience drifting along without much need to describe itself. It seems that this is part of why falling towards sleep so often feels like a slow dissolving rather than a sudden stop. The boundaries that usually separate one thought from the next begin to blur. A memory might drift quietly into an unrelated image. A stray sound from outside might fold gently into a half-formed thought, without resistance, without the usual effort to keep things separate and clear. What we understand so far suggests that this softened, drifting state may share more in common with meditation than most people realize. Long-standing meditation practices observed and studied in various forms often involve deliberately allowing the mind to settle into exactly this kind of loose, undirected awareness. The aim is rarely to think harder, but instead to let thought quiet down, to let attention rest somewhere gentle rather than sharp. In this way, the natural drift towards sleep may be something the body and mind already know how to do well without needing to be taught. The same soft unfocusing that meditation gently practices towards sleep arrives at naturally, almost effortlessly, each and every night. There is a tenderness in noticing this. The drifting feeling that may already be settling in now, the sense of thoughts loosening their grip, growing quieter, less defined, is not something to resist or hurry past. It may in its own way already be a kind of rest, a softening of the mind that asks nothing more from you than simply allowing it to happen. Evidence suggests that this state also makes the mind more receptive to gentle, undemanding stimuli, soft sounds, slow words, simple images, while becoming less receptive to anything sharp, urgent, or demanding of quick thought. It is part of why a quiet voice telling an unhurried story can feel so naturally suited to this particular hour. The mind in this state is not looking for something to solve. It is simply looking for somewhere safe to rest its attention lightly for a while. And there is one more threshold still ahead, quieter even than this one, where thought eventually lets go of itself almost entirely, and something else, something the waking mind rarely remembers, clearly begins. Sometimes in the middle of a dream, a story can unfold that feels as though it lasted an entire day. A long journey, a series of unrelated rooms, each leading to another. A conversation that seemed to stretch on for what felt like hours. And yet when you wake, only a few minutes may have actually passed since you closed your eyes. It seems that dreams have a strange, generous relationship with time, one that behaves quite differently from anything experienced while awake. Researchers have found that dreaming occurs most vividly during a stage of sleep, often referred to as REM sleep, named for the rapid eye movements that occur beneath closed eyelids during this period. During REM sleep, brain activity in certain regions becomes remarkably similar to the activity seen during waking hours, even though the body itself remains still deeply at rest. It is as though part of the mind continues working quietly and vividly, while the rest of the body simply lets go. Neuroscientists have observed that one particular ability seems to soften considerably during this stage, the brain's usual way of tracking how much time has actually passed. The regions most responsible for monitoring time appear less active during REM sleep than they are while awake. Without their usual steady oversight, the dreaming mind seems freer to wander, to leap between scenes, to compress or stretch experience. However, the unfolding story seems to require, without the constant correction that waking awareness normally provides. This may be part of why dreams so often defy ordinary logic when it comes to time. A scene can begin in one place and almost without transition continue somewhere else entirely. Years can pass within a dream in what feels like only a few connected moments. None of this feels strange while the dream is happening. It is only upon waking that the mind, restored fully to its usual sense of time, recognizes how unusual the experience truly was. It may be that the dreaming mind is not in fact measuring time at all in any conventional sense. It may simply be assembling experience scene by scene, the way memory itself often gathers fragments rather than continuous footage. A dream may not have an actual internal clock running through it. It may simply contain enough remembered impressions strung loosely together to feel as though considerable time has passed, in much the same way memory created the feeling of longer days during particularly eventful ones. Studies indicate that the length of REM sleep periods tends to grow longer as the night progresses, with the most vivid story, like dreams, often occurring closer to morning. This may be part of why dreams remembered just before waking often feel especially long and detailed, while dreams from earlier in the night, if they are even remembered at all, tend to feel shorter and far more fragmented. There is something quietly remarkable in considering that an entire small world, complete with places, people, and a felt sense of time passing, can be constructed by the mind in a matter of minutes, using only what it already carries inside itself. No new information arrives from outside during a dream. Everything experienced, every room, every voice, every sensation is built entirely from what the mind already holds, rearranged into something that for a little while feels every bit as real as waking life. Psychologists often note that dreams frequently draw on emotional memory more than factual memory, weaving feelings from recent days into scenes that may have little obvious connection to actual events. A dream may not replay what literally happened. It may instead replay what was felt, gently rearranged into new shapes, new settings, new unfamiliar faces standing in familiar emotions. What we understand so far suggests that this nightly process may serve a quiet, ongoing purpose, helping to process emotional experience, easing certain feelings into a more settled place by morning, even when the dream itself seems to make little logical sense upon waking. The strange dreamlike rearrangement may not be a flaw in the system. It may be exactly how the mind prefers to do this particular kind of quiet work. There is a tenderness, too, in realizing how much trust the body places in this nightly unraveling. Each night, willingly, awareness lets go of its usual hold-on time on logic, on continuity, trusting that something deeper will keep watch instead. The waking mind rarely remembers most of what happens during these hours, and yet it returns morning after morning, gently reassembled, somehow still itself. The mind, it seems, has been keeping something still and patient all along, quietly tending to feelings and memories long after conscious thought has stepped aside for the night. And there is a much larger version of this same gentle bending of time, still waiting to be noticed far beyond the edges of any single mind written, instead into the very fabric of the universe itself, far beyond the edges of dreams, beyond memory, beyond anything happening quietly inside a single mind. There is a much larger sense in which time itself does not move the same way everywhere. It seems that the universe, in its own vast and patient way, has been bending time long before any living thing existed to notice. Researchers have found that time does not pass identically for everyone, everywhere, regardless of circumstance. This idea, once almost unthinkable, was gently introduced through the work of a quiet, thoughtful physicist in the early years of the last century, who suggested that time and space were not separate fixed things, but were instead woven together into a single flexible fabric, one that could stretch and curve depending on certain conditions. One of those conditions involves speed. According to this understanding, the faster something moves through space, the slower time seems to pass for it compared to something standing still. This is not a trick of perception. It has been measured directly through extremely precise clocks placed on fast-moving aircraft and satellites' clocks that upon returning show a tiny measurable difference compared to identical clocks that remained on the ground. The difference is small, far too small to notice in ordinary life, but it is real, and it has been confirmed again and again. There is something quietly astonishing in this. It means that in a very real sense, no two clocks anywhere in the universe are ever moving through time in exactly the same way unless they happen to be moving through space identically as well. Time, rather than being one single river flowing, the same for everyone, behaves more like countless smaller streams, each shaped slightly differently by its own particular motion. Studies indicate that gravity too plays a quiet role in shaping the pace of time. Near something with a great deal of mass, a planet, a star, or especially something as dense as a black hole, time appears to move more slowly than it does farther away from that same mass. A clock placed near the base of a tall mountain in a slightly stronger gravitational pull will run very slightly slower than an identical clock placed near its peak. The difference is impossibly tiny, smaller than anything the body could ever feel, and yet it has been measured carefully and found to be true. It may be that this is one of the strangest, gentlest truths about the universe. That time is not a constant backdrop against which everything else happens. It is something woven directly into the shape of space itself, bending wherever mass and motion ask it to bend, indifferent to whether anyone is there to notice. Evidence suggests that near the edge of an especially massive object, this bending becomes extreme enough that time from an outside perspective can appear to slow almost to a stop. Something falling towards such an object would, from far away, seem to take an impossibly long time to arrive, its motion appearing to stretch out more and more the closer it gets, even though from its own perspective very little time would seem unusual at all. Two perspectives, two very different experiences of the same passing moment simply because of where each one happened to be standing. There is a soft, almost dizzying wonder in imagining this. The few hours settling quietly around you right now, here in this particular place, are not the same few hours that would be experienced somewhere else in the universe, somewhere closer to enormous mass, or somewhere moving at extraordinary speed. Time, it turns out, has never truly been one single universal thing. It has always been something local, something personal in a strange and almost intimate way, shaped by exactly where and how each particular observer happens to be moving through the world. What we understand so far suggests that this same gentle bending applies in the smallest and most ordinary of ways, even here, even now. The time experienced lying still in a quiet room moves technically very slightly differently from the time experienced by someone walking briskly somewhere else entirely. The difference is far too small to ever notice. But it is there quietly woven into the fabric of this very moment, the same way it is woven into everything else in the universe. Psychologists often note almost in passing how strange it is that something as vast and impersonal as the physics of space and time should end up resembling so closely the much smaller, much softer bending of time experienced inside a single mind. Attention stretches a moment. Mass and motion stretch a moment. Different scales entirely, and yet somehow the same underlying truth keeps quietly reappearing. Time bends, it always has, whether shaped by a busy mind noticing too much or by a universe simply being itself. There is a strange comforting symmetry in that thought lying here now. The same gentle elasticity found in dreams, in memory and attention, may not be separate from the universe at all. It may simply be the smallest, closest reflection of something far larger, something written into the very nature of space itself, long before there was any mind around to notice it bending. And there is still one more quiet thread left to follow closer to home than galaxies or black holes about the present moment itself, and just how far behind it the mind may always be living. There is something almost impossible to believe, and yet it seems to be true. The very moment you feel as though you are experiencing right now, this instant, this sound, this stillness is not actually happening right now at all. It already happened just a fraction of a second ago. What you are feeling, this very breath, is a small echo, gently delayed, arriving to conscious awareness only after it has already passed. Researchers have found that everything the senses gather, light entering the eyes, sound reaching the ears, the soft pressure of a blanket against skin, takes a small amount of time to travel through the nervous system before it ever becomes something you consciously notice. This delay is brief, usually only a fraction of a second, but it is real, and it means that what feels like the present moment is technically always something slightly in the past. It may be that the brain compensates for this delay in a quiet, clever way, stitching together everything it receives into something that feels smooth, immediate and continuous, even though underneath it is actually assembling a kind of patchwork from signals that arrived at slightly different times. Sound, for instance, often takes a little longer to process than light. And yet watching someone speak from a short distance away, the voice and the movement of their mouth feel perfectly aligned. The brain has quietly adjusted behind the scenes, smoothing over the difference, so that what is experienced consciously feels seamless. There is something tender in this idea. The brain is not simply receiving the world, it is gently constructing it moment by moment, weaving slightly mismatched signals into something that feels coherent, continuous and whole. The smooth, peaceful sense of now, the one settling around you, even as these words are spoken, is itself a quiet act of creation performed endlessly without any conscious effort at all. Neuroscientists have observed that this delay becomes even more noticeable the more complex an experience is. Recognizing a face, for instance, or processing the meaning of spoken language requires slightly more time than simply registering a flash of light or a sudden sound. This means that some parts of experience are technically a little further behind the actual present moment than others, all blended together so skillfully that the difference is never consciously felt. It seems that what we call the present moment may be better understood as something closer to a finished recording played back almost instantly, rather than something experienced exactly as it happens. The mind is always, in a sense, looking slightly backward, even while it feels entirely focused on now. Studies indicate that this small delay exists for an understandable reason. Gathering, organizing, and making sense of so much incoming information simply takes time, even if that time is extremely brief. A nervous system that tried to skip this step, responding instantly to raw, unprocessed signals, would likely feel chaotic, fragmented, far less coherent than the smooth experience we are used to. The slight delay, then, may be a small price paid in exchange for a present moment that feels calm, unified, and easy to rest inside rather than scattered and overwhelming. There is a soft kind of comfort in this. It suggests that the gentle, settled feeling of this very moment, however ordinary it might seem, is the result of an extraordinarily careful, quiet process happening continuously somewhere just beneath conscious awareness. Nothing about this moment arrived instantly. It was gathered, gently assembled, and offered to you already finished, already calm. What we understand so far suggests that this delay also shapes how decisions and reactions occur. In certain studies, researchers have found that signals associated with the decision can sometimes be detected in the brain slightly before a person feels consciously aware of having decided anything at all. This does not mean choice is an illusion, but it does suggest that conscious awareness may arrive a little later in the process than it feels like it does observing decisions in some small sense, just after they have already begun to form. It seems that the conscious mind, the part that notices, that feels, that quietly narrates each passing moment, is always living just slightly behind everything else that is actually happening. Not far behind, only a sliver of a moment, but always trailing gently just behind the true edge of now. There is something quietly soothing in accepting this rather than resisting it. If the present moment has always been a small, carefully constructed echo slightly behind the actual world, then there is no need to chase it or hold it too tightly or worry about losing a now that was never fully graspable to begin with. It can simply be allowed to arrive gently again and again the way it always has without ever needing to be caught. The mind quietly registers this rhythm constantly without complaint, without strain, accepting each small delay as simply part of how experience has always worked. And perhaps especially now, there is something almost restful in that acceptance. The need to stay perfectly present, perfectly now, can loosen its grip a little once it becomes clear that now has always been, in its own small way, a gentle step behind. There remains only a little further to drift toward a quieter understanding, still one that has less to do with delay or distance or motion, and far more to do with simply letting all of this gently begin to fade. There is no need to chase that fading edge any further tonight. The mind has wandered through clocks that do not quite tell the truth, through memories that bend and soften, through dreams that stretch minutes into something larger, through a universe that bends time itself, without ever asking permission, and now gently all of it can simply be set down. It seems that the body has been listening to all of this in its own quiet way, even as the mind followed each idea. The breath has likely slowed somewhere along the way. The shoulders may have loosened without anyone deciding to loosen them. Time, the very thing we have been wandering through this entire while, has perhaps already started to lose its sharp edges the way it always does this close to sleep. There is no clock that matters now, only the soft, steady fact of lying still in the dark with nowhere left to be. Researchers have found that this exact state, the body heavy, the thoughts thin and slow, the world outside quiet, is often the gentlest place for sleep to finally arrive. Not forced, not chased, simply allowed the way water is allowed to settle once nothing stirs it any longer. The hours discussed tonight, the seconds that stretched, the years that thinned the dreams that wandered freely without any clock to guide them, all of it can drift now, loosely somewhere, just behind conscious thought, the way a half-remembered tune lingers after the music has stopped. There is nothing left to understand, nothing left to hold on to carefully, only this, the quiet weight of a body finally still, a breath slower than the one before it. Somewhere outside, perhaps a faint hush of wind or distant traffic or nothing at all, it does not matter which. The mind loosening now may drift toward a place with no name, a soft field half formed, a low light somewhere far off, neither rising nor falling, a sense of floating gently without direction. There is no story left to follow, only stillness settling like dust after a long slow day. The dark holds nothing urgent, just a quiet shape of a room fading slightly at its edges, A breath, another. Somewhere a light dims slowly without ever quite going out, and here now is simply rest.